Hello everyone, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we are going to look into the case of Isabelle Jocson. This isn't the first time we've covered a case where the main people involved are minors. More than once on this channel, we've talked about stories where both the victim and the killer are children or teenagers. Although, fortunately, these cases aren't common. The facts often shock us so much that we don't think about what happens afterward. That the person responsible served their sentence. Even though policies regarding minors who commit crimes differ from country to country, it's extremely rare for a child or teenager to spend their entire life in detention for their actions. And what we're going to see today is an example of that, while also raising a question. Do teenagers like Isabelle Jocson, who committed heinous crimes, deserve to enjoy a full and happy life once they've served their sentence? That's partly what this video is about, so let's talk about the events that happened in 2022. The events of this case took place in Nashville, a city in Tennessee, United States, where about 700,000 people live. In the summer of 2022, that included Isabelle Jocson, 16 years old, and Malia Powell, 14. As is often the case when the main people involved are so young, there isn't much information available about their lives. We know the most about Malia. The younger of the two teenagers was born on February 20th, 2008, in that same city, where her parents, Ebony Ridley and Larry Powell, were also from. Again, even though we don't know many details about Malia's life, we do know that she grew up in a lower middle-class home where there was never a lack of love. Malia was the youngest of 3 siblings, and that made her the spoiled one right from the start, not just by her great-uncles and aunts, but even by her siblings, Jawantes and Jackwell Powell, who were several years older than her. This, in turn, meant that she spent much of her teenage years almost as if she were an only child. And the interesting thing about it is, while her siblings were already in their 20s and had started living independent adult lives of their own, she was just beginning to enter her teenage years, which in turn made her relationship with her mother become even more significantly close. As we mentioned before, at the time these events took place, Malia was 14 years old and had just finished 8th grade at Bellevue Middle School, her last year of middle school, which covers the final years of elementary and the first years of secondary school, so she was already ready to move on to what is known as high school, where she would complete her final years of basic secondary education, starting with 9th grade. This meant leaving the school she had attended for the past 2 years to transfer to a new one, which in her case would be Hillwood High, where she was already enrolled. While many of her friends and classmates were nervous about this new stage, Malia didn't share that anxiety. On the contrary, she was extremely excited for classes to begin. And she often tried to spread her excitement to those around her who were more nervous, which was typical given her personality. During her years at Bellevue Middle School, Malia had managed to become one of the most popular students. She earned part of her status after joining the cheerleading team, where her hard work and natural talent made her stand out from the very beginning. Although it was her kind and fun personality, as well as her ability to lead, that allowed her to become the cheerleading captain. She held this position in a way that was very different from the typical portrayal of cheerleaders we see in American movies or TV shows. Far from being mean, egotistical, or acting like she was out of reach, Malia was still the same energetic girl who was kind to everyone, whether they were considered popular or not. Some of her teachers even described her as the one who always made everyone laugh. So her personality was more like the class clown than the villain in a teen story. That's why what happened on June 20th, 2022 came as a shock to everyone who knew her. Since it was the warm summer break, it was normal for Malia to spend most of her day outside with her close friends, and that particular day was really no different at all. Unfortunately, the files related to the investigation of the case were never made public, and because of that, there are some pretty big gaps in the information. For example, the hours leading up to the incident. According to what Ebony, Malia's mother, told the media, that day her youngest daughter left the house in the afternoon to meet up with her friends at a park that wasn't too far away. It was a regular plan for the group, so she had no problem letting her daughter go out, as long as she came back home before her curfew, which was after 10 p.m. Obviously, she never imagined that saying goodbye to her daughter that afternoon would be the last time she saw her alive. Unfortunately, we don't know exactly what time she left the house or how long she was at the park with her friends. The only thing we can say for sure is that a little before 10 at night, she and her group were at the Walmart located on Dickerson Pike. It was there that they ran into another group of teenagers, which included Isabelle Jocson, the 16-year-old girl. We have practically no information about her, other than that she was there with a couple of friends, wandering through the supermarket aisles, and, according to most sources, stealing a thing or two. It wasn't something they did out of necessity, but more out of rebellion, and apparently they weren't very discreet about it, because when Malia and her friends, as they walked past them, the youngest one noticed and made a comment about what they were doing. At this point, it's important to clarify that none of the girls knew each other beforehand. Neither Malia knew Isabelle, nor did their friends know the others. But that comment sparked a brief argument between the two groups. Isabelle was the first to react, inviting Malia to meet her outside the store to fight, something the youngest one ignored so she could finish shopping and leave with her friends. However, the two groups ran into each other again outside the Walmart. At this point, I'm telling you the facts as they're described in official sources and local news outlets, just as I would with any other case. Even though it might seem like a strange clarification, you'll understand later why we're doing it this way. According to the sources, Malia's group had arrived there in one of the older girls' cars, while Isabelle's group had to head to the bus stop near the supermarket. It was on the way there that the two groups ran into each other again, and after another argument, a fight broke out between Isabelle and Malia. Due to the lack of official information, we don't know who started the fight, or if either of their friends got involved, but we do know how it ended. At some point during the fight, Isabelle pulled out a knife and started stabbing the younger girl in the neck and chest until Malia stopped resisting. By that time, Jackson's friends had already left her, so when she realized what she had done, the teenager calmly walked away from the scene so as not to draw attention, heading home. Malia's friends, desperate, called emergency services and then the girl's parents, and she was immediately taken to the nearest hospital. However, she had suffered more than 10 deep stab wounds, and although the medical team tried to save her, their efforts to stabilize her and save her life were in vain. Malia died at the hospital. Larry, her father, remembers finding out from his oldest daughter. By that time, he and Ebony had separated, so he no longer lived in the same house. That day was his birthday, and he had planned to meet up with his 3 children to celebrate together. But instead of receiving the loving messages he was expecting, he got the horrifying news that Malia was dead. The sudden murder of a teenage girl made headlines the next morning, leaving the entire Nashville community in shock. The city had become more dangerous in recent years, but this case wasn't about insecurity. It was about a rise in violence that shocked everyone because of how young the victim was. Just imagine the public's reaction when it was revealed that Malia had been killed by a girl 2 years older than her. The homicide unit of the Nashville Police Department began their investigation that very night, questioning those who had been with Malia at Walmart. Her friends were able to recount what had happened before the incident, and even managed to describe the attacker. However, since it was the first time they had seen her, they couldn't provide any more information, like her name or address or where she was from. Besides her description, one of the girls who was with Malia was able to point out the direction in which she had left, but not much more. Of course, aside from talking to them, their next move was to request the security camera footage that Walmart had on the premises. Thanks to the tapes, they were able to see the fight with their own eyes and confirm the story told by Malia's friends. They still needed to figure out which way the attacker had gone, and, with any luck, identify her by finding out where she went. To do that, the detectives requested footage from the government cameras located on Dickerson Pike, and thanks to a thorough analysis, they discovered that after walking a couple of blocks, the attacker had stopped a car and gotten in. Through the images, they were able to identify the car's license plate. And with that information, they were able to track down the owner, who was able to give them the address where he had taken the teenager. The house belonged to the Jackson family, where Isabelle's father greeted them seemingly calm, agreeing to let them speak with his daughter without any trouble. When Isabelle came downstairs to talk to the detectives, the first thing that caught their attention was that the teenager no longer looked like she did in most of her photos and in the video. She had radically cut her hair and even dyed it, which made their suspicions even greater. 3 days had passed since Maria Powell's death when the Nashville police arrested Isabelle Jocson after officially charging her with what had happened to the minor. Even though she was a murderer, since she was a minor, the police and state justice system made sure to keep both the investigation and the judicial process out of the public eye to protect Isabelle and her potential future. Just to give you an idea, the last clear news anyone had about this case was her arrest. It was never made public exactly what charges she was facing, and even less so whether her case would be tried in juvenile court or adult court. In fact, no one even found out when her trial took place or what sentence she received. Despite the impact it had on the public and the calls for justice from Malia's closest circle, the lack of information led to less and less attention being paid to the case until it was simply forgotten. Malia Powell's name and her family's only returned to the news in September of that year, when tragedy struck them once again. Malia's older brother, 22 years old, was murdered outside a gas station in the north of the city by a young man 3 years younger who, for no apparent reason, decided to attack him after a dispute. Beyond this incident, there was no more talk of Malia or Isabelle until last year, when it was discovered that the attacker had not only regained her freedom, but had also changed her name, and, under a new identity, was becoming a rising influencer. Around March of last year, 2025, the Asian House on TikTok announced through a video the addition of a new member, Luna May, a 19-year-old girl with more than 250,000 followers on that social network and another 370,000 on Instagram, where she started posting content in September 2024, around the same time, when she also began posting on her TikTok account. The truth is that at first, Luna's addition to the Asian House didn't attract much attention. Luna was on the rise, gaining more followers every day, and she met the basic requirements to be part of that group. She was pretty, of Asian descent, and had good numbers. However, her videos there and her collaborations with other influencers helped Luna reach more people, including some from Nashville, to whom her face became extremely familiar, almost like someone they knew. But before we get to that, let's pause for a moment to talk about the concept of the Asian House, a content house. This isn't something that necessarily started on TikTok, but nowadays that's where we see it the most. It's a group of content creators who move in together with the idea of producing more videos, photos, and so on, and making it easier for them to collaborate with each other to achieve better results from their videos and, as a result, more money. For these houses to be successful, it's most common for them to be made up of a group of content creators who have a similar audience, create the same type of content, share some characteristic, or at least live nearby. The most well-known of these houses was at one point the Hype House, which even got its own reality show on Netflix. I don't know if it was the first, but it was definitely one of the firsts. It was made up of the first generation of famous TikTokers, like Charli D'Amelio and Lil Hattie, among others. But there are dozens of these houses. There's the one we're talking about right now, the Asian House, where all the members are of Asian descent. There's also the Blonde House, where all the girls in the house are blonde. In the case of the Asian house, they not only share being Asian, but also the fact that their content is pretty risque, which all the members were creating. Luna May, just like the others, wasn't only active on the social media platforms we mentioned before, but she also had her own OnlyFans account, where she shared content that was much more erotic than what she posted on her other profiles, where, by the way, almost all her photos and videos are in lingerie or highlighting her beauty. Luna May's rise was relatively easy. Just a few months after starting in 2025, her follower count was impressive, and her content began reaching more people thanks to collaborations with other content creators. That's when some people started to notice that her face looked familiar to them, as if they had seen it somewhere else before. At first, there were only a few of these comments, but as her numbers grew, so did the number of people claiming they recognized her from somewhere else, even sparking debates in her comment section, which Luna completely ignored. But that didn't make them go away. On the contrary, it encouraged several Reddit users who felt the same way to start theorizing and investigating. That's how they found the prison photo taken on June 23rd, 2022, and from there, the news stories. Luna May was actually Isabelle Jocson, the 16-year-old girl who had killed another teenager. TikTok was flooded with videos sharing the influencer's real identity, making it impossible for her to keep ignoring what had been brewing for several weeks. She spoke publicly about the topic for the first time through a sort of interview with Andy Mealy at the beginning of May 2025. In a 28-minute YouTube video, the influencer shared her version of what had happened 3 years earlier, and the way she told the story was what sparked the most outrage among people. The video begins with Andy Mealy's 7th condolences to Malia's family and briefly talking about who the girl was, speaking very highly of her, with a solemn tone that comes off as pretty ironic considering that the guest on her channel is literally the person who ended the teenager's life. Let's just suppose for a moment that we believe her condolences to the Powells are genuine. Immediately after this brief introduction, she directly asks Luna if she had known Malia before the incident, and Luna begins to tell her side of the story. According to her, she had never seen the girl or her friends before running into them inside the Walmart. Isabelle and her friends noticed the other group when they realized the girls were looking at them, whispering something and laughing, but they decided to ignore them until one of them, not Malia, approached one of Isabelle's friends who was in the food court while the girls were in the area where the makeup was. Exactly. Malia's friend had approached Jackson's friend to snitch on her, that is, to tell him she was stealing something, which made Isabelle really uncomfortable. Even though it was true, she didn't understand why those girls cared so much that she was stealing from a Walmart, and even less why they had to go tell her friend. So Isabelle gathered her group and asked them to leave, and her friends agreed. However, as they were leaving the supermarket, they realized that the group of girls who had been watching them came out right behind them and even approached as they crossed the Walmart parking lot to meet up with the friends who had stayed outside. Malia got into the car of someone Isabelle said was one of her cousins and sat in the back seat, while one of her friends in the front started mockingly asking Jackson why she didn't go steal something else, and even called her ugly, along with a few other insults. That's when Isabelle, still feeling uncomfortable, supposedly asked them if they could just leave her alone, which, according to her, made the girls start threatening to get out of the car and beat them up. At first, she didn't take it seriously, so she tried to distract herself with her friends by playing with one of the supermarket's motorized shopping carts. Ignoring the girls didn't have the effect she was hoping for, because while she was playing with her friends, she heard the car door slam shut. Frightened, Isabelle supposedly ran to meet up with the rest of her friends and asked them to walk her to the bus stop that was on the same block. As they were walking, one of her friends gave her back the pocket knife she had lent him a little earlier to open something, and they kept walking to the bus stop. It was when they arrived that she realized the other group had followed them and was now yelling at them from the car. "Why are you running? Don't be a coward," trying to get Isabelle to agree to fight them. Getting more and more nervous, Jocson went up to the bus driver, who was just starting his route there, and asked if they could get on to avoid having to keep dealing with the girls, but the man refused. It was when Isabelle turned around to go back to her friends that she noticed the group of girls coming closer, and before she could do anything, one of them grabbed her by the hair. Isabelle says she doesn't remember exactly what happened. She explains that this happens because of the adrenaline putting her into a state of fight or flight, a natural defense mechanism where our brain prepares us for an incredibly challenging situation, and we might either dissociate or remain hypervigilant and alert for exactly what's coming next. In her case, Jocson said that for her, it meant fainting, as if her brain just shut off, and for the next few minutes, she was completely out of it. She regained consciousness after someone pushed her to the ground and started hitting her hard with a shopping cart from the supermarket. It was at that moment that she realized that just a few yards away, on the grass, there was already a girl who seemed unconscious, and no one was paying any attention to her, since they preferred to beat her up instead of helping her friend. Isabelle described how she remembers thinking that none of it made any sense, and even getting angry when she saw a guy at the bus stop take out his phone and start recording what was happening, instead of helping her or the other girl. However, as soon as she had the chance to leave, she did. She walked away from the people who had hit her and, replaying what had happened in the last few minutes, started walking toward her house. Halfway there, she hitchhiked and managed to get a car to take her the rest of the way. She got home with her hands in her pockets and immediately went to wash up. According to her, she wasn't aware of what had happened. In other words, she didn't know that Malia had died or if she was the one responsible. But the image of all the blood at the crime scene paralyzed her. So, through tears, she told her father what had happened, or at least what she remembered. It was he who supposedly presented her with two possibilities. Even though her father understood that she hadn't meant to hurt anyone, he knew the authorities wouldn't see it that way. So he told his daughter she had two options: face what happened and the possible consequences, or run away, which would mean having to do so for the rest of her life. Isabelle says she chose not to run because she didn't want people to think she was guilty when all she had done was defend herself. That happened on June 22nd, the day Isabelle was detained in a Nashville juvenile center, isolated from the rest of the girls, who knew what she had done and didn't seem happy about it. Although the video didn't say much about her sentence or how long she was in prison, Isabelle mentions that since it was self-defense, her sentence was significantly reduced, which allowed her to regain her freedom relatively soon. This is the hardest part to digest in the whole video because here Isabelle goes on to victimize herself even more. She says that after leaving the reformatory, she didn't go back to school out of fear of retaliation if anyone found out what she had been through. It was during that time that she decided to change her name and try to start a new life by looking for work. However, since she didn't legally change her name, according to her, finding a job was impossible, and that led her to create adult content on OnlyFans, since online she could hide her past. She literally went so far as to say that killing someone forced her to become a sex worker, as if that were worse than the fact that she took someone's life. The interview sparked different reactions, and Luna May's social media was flooded with comments criticizing the way she talked about what happened, and especially for portraying herself as the victim. Comments like "more than 7 stab wounds is not self-defense" went viral, and Isabelle chose to respond to them on her TikTok account in a way that was much less sentimental than on the podcast. Instead of crying and asking for forgiveness, like she had done in that video, she started responding to these kinds of comments on her account in an even aggressive manner, arguing that people were judging her without really knowing what had happened, and emphasizing that she had been hit at the moment she stabbed Malia multiple times. The way she responded to the podcast and the case itself went viral on TikTok, and that led several people who had known her back then to speak out about the topic. However, the most interesting testimony came from a girl named Vanessa. Unlike Isabelle, she didn't use her TikTok account to create content or be an influencer. She just used it casually. But when she found out what Isabelle was saying, she decided to record her own video since she had been at the same youth center as this girl. In a short video, Vanessa refuted several points that Isabelle had made on the podcast. She started by saying that Jackson hadn't been isolated because the other inmates wanted to hurt her, but rather because at the time of her arrest, the girl was struggling with addiction to several drugs and had to be kept in isolation while she went through withdrawal, and the authorities worked to get her clean from the various substances she was addicted to. She also added that they wouldn't let her join the others because she had piercings, and in order to be in the common areas, she needed to take them out, something Isabelle absolutely refused to do, and that was also a reason to keep her isolated. When they finally let her stay with the rest of the girls, Vanessa says that back then, Isabelle told a very different version of what happened compared to what she later shared on the podcast and in her videos. She didn't talk about Malia's death as an act of self-defense, according to what Vanessa says in her video. Isabelle told them that she was with her friends stealing when Malia and her friends made a joke about them, which started the problem inside the Walmart. That's why the oldest girl left the supermarket and went to the parking lot, where the group of girls followed her, continuing the argument that had started inside. According to what she told them, at that moment, the argument wasn't with Malia, but with one of her friends. Supposedly, it was that friend who was supposed to fight Isabelle, not Malia. However, for some reason, the younger girl's group of friends ended up encouraging Malia to fight Isabelle, and we know how that turned out. According to what she herself told them at the reformatory, even before the fight started, she was already playing with the knife her friend had given her. She wanted to look tough and scare the younger girl. When they started fighting, she dissociated and thought she was just hitting her, when in reality she was stabbing her. At no point did she mention that Malia's friends had hit her before, or that she realized what she had done while they were hitting her with a shopping cart. She simply told them that somehow she had forgotten she had the knife in her hands and that she started stabbing her, thinking she was just hitting her, which clearly clashes with the victim narrative she told on the podcast. Vanessa said that while Isabelle was telling this story, she wasn't crying or looking remorseful, which made her really angry when she saw the podcast, because in real life, Isabelle hadn't even shown any regret for what she did. This girl also denied that Isabelle nobly chose to face the consequences of her actions. According to what she herself had told her, her father didn't give her an inspiring talk about taking responsibility for her actions. Instead, his first reaction was to buy a plane ticket so Isabelle could flee the country and stay with relatives. And as part of that, he helped her change her physical appearance. However, according to what the girl herself told her fellow inmates at the reformatory, she never managed to escape because the police arrived at her house before she could carry out the plan. It's hard to tell who's telling the truth when we don't have the official information or the conclusions that the justice system reached at the time. Although Isabelle's brief sentence leads us to believe that it was clearly determined she acted in self-defense. What is hard to believe is when someone who claims to have known her so well tells a very different story. But beyond who is telling the truth, things get even more complicated when we hear Isabelle's version and realize that she seems to see herself as a victim of what happened. While taking a life in self-defense is different from premeditated murder, it's hard to sympathize with someone who plays the victim in a situation like this. I don't get the sense that Isabelle admits that even if it was self-defense, it was still a mistake. She seems more focused on the consequences the attack had on her own life, when on the other side there's a family who lost their daughter, and a teenager who never got to live her life the way Isabelle does now, without facing any real consequences. Right now, Isabella Luna is still making money online, as if nothing had ever happened, and the case around her seems to have been forgotten once again. And, well, that's how we come to the end of the video. Had you heard about this case? And what do you think about it? I'm reading your comments. And here on the screen, you can see the channel members. Thank you for supporting me through that option. I really appreciate it so much. I truly do. I really try to get videos out to members faster than to the rest of my followers, to keep my promise. Sometimes it gets a little tricky, but I think we're on the right track. So, well, that's it for now. Here's a new video, here's a recommended video, you can subscribe by clicking on my face, and then I'll see you in another video. Bye!